But we begin tonight with what you don't need to know, do not need to know about last night's Republican primaries. Not. That's not a typo in my script. We are not going to address the question of what last night's results tell us about the influence of the Tea Party movement. We are not going to weigh whether anti-incumbent fever is in fact sweeping the nation. Quick, you may catch it. And at least for the moment, we are not going to look at what this will all mean when the votes are eventually counted 69 nights from now in the big enchilada 2010 elections. Not that yet. Instead, tonight, now, we're going to introduce you to the field of GOP nominees for 2010. No longer mere candidates. Because continuing our theme of not, there is a lot about these folks that the people in charge now of getting them elected would prefer you do not know about them. At this hour, the votes are still being counted in Alaska's Republican Senate primary. Senator Lisa Murkowski trailing the challenger Joe Miller by about 2,000 votes, with a few thousand absentee ballots still to be counted. Mr. Miller having run against Senator Murkowski by, among other things, claiming that the senator appears to shed her conservative credentials, much in the manner of, well, other types of Alaskans.
I'm Joe Miller, the true conservative choice for the U.S. Senate in Alaska. My opponent says one thing during the short election season here in Alaska, but then when she gets back to D.C., she sheds those views. In fact, she sheds those views more often than a moose sheds its antlers. Take Obamacare, for instance. In Alaska, my opponent says she's against it. She wants to get rid of it. But just this past March, she says we shouldn't repeal it. It has good stuff in it.
Subtle, right? She's shedding her previous positions like a moose sheds its antlers. Very subtle. In case you missed it, because it is so subtle, Mr. Miller in the ad picks up antlers not once, not twice, but a total of 7 times in the one ad. 8, actually, if you count the double-fisted antlers in the closing shot. Look, Ma, both hands. If you would like to learn more than just antlers about Mr. Joe Miller, his campaign has been directing people to its website, where you'll find that under the heading Values, Mr. Miller has listed just one value, that he believes, quote, life must be protected from the moment of conception. He wants to make it illegal for a woman to have an abortion in any circumstances, even if her pregnancy results from being raped or from incest. What will be fun to watch is how much of Mr. Miller's campaign website, one value in all, is allowed to survive now that he is not just a candidate, but the Republican Party's official U.S. Senate nominee, provided that the counting goes the way it has been going up in Alaska. The National Republican Party having already given an extreme makeover to another of its Senate nominees, of course, Sharon Angle of Nevada. They overhauled her website, denutified it, if you will, cleaned it up, certain items in the platform. They took out the part about abolishing the Department of Education, for example. All the GOP wants you to know is, quote, there is no one more committed to education than Sharon Angle. She's so committed she will do away with the department of that thing. As for Sharon Angle's belief that Social Security should be eliminated or privatized, the new and improved Sharon Angle website says, quote, we must keep the promise of Social Security. Keep it how? By creating personalized accounts for the next generation. Personalized accounts that, of course, can be wiped out in a matter of hours by the stock market. Yes. Similar changes soon appear at joemiller.us. Spare a thought for whoever's job it is at the National Republican Senate Campaign Committee to make the Republicans who are winning Senate primaries this year seem like mainstream candidates for the general election. Just as one example, Joe Miller in Alaska is now one of 4 Republican Senate nominees. If he wins this thing over Murkowski, one of 4 Republican Senate nominees who has said they oppose abortion even in cases of rape or incest. The others, of course, are Sharon Angle, Ken Buck in Colorado, and Rand Paul in Kentucky. And that would seem to make that among the top unifying positions for Republican Senate candidates this year. It's not just that this year's crop of Republican top-of-the-ticket candidates want to ixnay Social Security. Good news for cat food makers. It's also that they want the government to monitor every pregnancy in this country to ensure that that every single pregnancy in the country results in a live birth. They want the government to force every woman made pregnant by rape to give birth to her rapist's baby. And that's just the candidates for the Senate. In House races last night, Arizona Republicans elected Ben Quayle as their nominee in the Arizona 3rd. He's marketing himself as a family-friendly congressional candidate, so family-friendly that he took the extra step of making it seem like his nieces were actually his daughters in a direct mail advertising campaign. He does not have children of his own, but he wanted it to look like he did. Does not have kids, does not want you to know that. Also, Ben Quayle, wants you to know that even though he is Dan Quayle's son, and even though he made up a fake family for himself to campaign with, Ben Quayle wants you to know that he is very tough. He is so tough, in fact, he swears.
I love Arizona. I was raised right. Somebody has to go to Washington and knock the hell out of the place.
Ben Quayle. Dan Quayle's son. Oh, please, may his ads stay that good. And in Florida, Democratic Congressman Alan Grayson is now facing the prospect of running against a man named Daniel Webster, who, in addition to having one of those amazing names in politics, is also famous for his support of covenant marriage. He has sponsored and supported legislation that would make getting a divorce just about impossible. So, meet the class of 2010 Republican Party candidates. Dumping Social Security, forcing rape victims to have rapists' babies, knocking the hell out of Washington, and banning divorce. These are not the things the D.C. spin guys want their crop of candidates this year to be famous for, but oh, they are. They are, they are, they are. Joining us now is Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell. Governor Rendell, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
All politics, of course, is local, but should Democrats this year run against Republicans as a group, as a whole, given the crop of candidates that Republicans have nominated this year?
Yeah, I think, Rachel, there's something out there that I would call the wacko or the cuckoo factor. And I think independents and swing voters have got to be scared to death hearing about all these Republican candidates, these extremists, these people who want to repeal the 14th Amendment, the birthers, you name it. They've got to be scared to death. So even if I was a Democrat running against a moderate or a reasonable conservative, I'd raise the picture in voters' minds. Do you want this party, with all of these wackos, with all these extremists, do you want this party in control of the Congress? So I think even in a local race, individual races, it's fair game to say this party is getting more and more control by people who are whacked out, who are way extreme, and you don't want to give the reins of power to this party, so vote Democrat.
Specifically on the issue of abortion, Democratic politicians, of course, aren't uniformly pro-choice, but I can't find any other time in history when so many top-tier candidates are running on an abortion position that is as extreme as Republicans this year. Should that be a national campaign issue? Are Democrats too afraid of that as an issue to make it a national issue?
Well, I think it falls into, again, the wacko quotient. I don't know anybody. I know a lot of good people who are pro-life, but I don't know anybody, reasonable person, who thinks that a woman who's raped should be forced to have the child of the rapist. And that's such an extreme position that, yes, I think that falls into all of these extreme positions, all of the hate, all of the divisiveness that many Republican candidates, not all, but many are bringing to the table. That has to be an issue, and we've got to say, do you want to turn the government, or a good portion of the government, over to a party that has people like this in growing numbers?
But isn't it true, though, that Democrats have been really afraid of talking about abortion at not only the national level, but even at the state level? Democrats who are pro-choice almost never campaign on that. They never bring it up. It's become the new Democratic common wisdom that if you bring up the issue of abortion, it always works against you. Isn't that true?
Well, I think with many Democrats, again, it goes back to what I've been saying all year, and I've said it on this show. We Democrats are too afraid of talking about the things we believe in. A woman's right to choose is certainly something that most Democrats, not all, most Democrats believe in, and I believe it's a position that the majority of Americans still believe is the reasonable position. We ought to be talking about it, but we ought to be talking about the things we believe in. Look, what worries me most about this election is the turnout factor. And you saw the Wall Street Journal poll. Among all voters, they choose Democrats by a slight majority. But among voters who are likely to vote, it's 50 to 39 Republicans. So we've got to do things to get our base to come out. And that means talking about what we believe in. Talking about health care. Do you know in September in Pennsylvania, Rachel, I'm doing 3 press conferences. One with the first child who was denied coverage because they had a pre-existing illness who gets covered because of the health care bill. 2, when our high-risk pool starts to enroll individuals, and we'll be enrolling 3,000 people in September. And 3, when those $250 checks start arriving to seniors to plug the donut hole, or at least plug part of the donut hole in Medicare Part D. Those are all good things. We should be proud of what we've accomplished. If we sit back and don't talk about the things we believe in, our base isn't going to come out just based on negatives.
That's exactly the question that I wanted to turn it toward. In thinking about sort of a Democratic prescription for driving turnout, obviously the playing field right now is that Republicans are more motivated. Couldn't the Democratic base also be motivated essentially, though, by fear of what's out there among these Republican extremist candidates? Doesn't negative campaigning essentially motivate people?
It does to a degree. It does to a degree. But as long as Democrats are not reminded about the things, I think the president has accomplished a great deal. I don't think he gets credit for half of what he's accomplished. I think we've got to be reminded of the fact that we fought for principles. The stimulus was a principle. Certainly, the health care was an important principle. Wall Street responsibility, an important principle. We've accomplished an awful lot, and we have to say the positives along with the negatives. Sure, the message to our voters are, look, we've made progress. It hasn't been easy because of the economic times. We've made progress. We're going to continue to push the progressive agenda. And in the meantime, worry big time about the wacko factor in the Republican Party, because that's not America. That's not the America you and I want. I think it has to be a dual message.
I will say that the headline that's going to come out of this interview is Ed Rendell coins wacko factor for midterm elections. That one's going to stick.
Well, do you disagree?
Not at all.
Do you disagree?
I'm just happy you said it here. Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.